Well, I'm really glad to be here. It's been a really extraordinary month or two for me. As Bob said, I was in Copenhagen. It was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. Along with Bob and many of his colleagues here at Gund and the Rubenstein Center, I was down in Washington last week for a gathering of the National Council on Science and the Environment. That was also an extraordinary gathering. And just generally, as you all feel, this is quite a time in our history. We are part of something much bigger than ourselves. I've been feeling that a lot lately. And because I'm on sabbatical from Middlebury College where I teach, I've really had the opportunity to delve into these challenges and think about them seriously. I will say, I typically, when I give a talk, I start with a certain giddiness. I try to crack jokes and things like that, and I guess I'll do some of that. But I don't feel very giddy right now. There's sort of a seriousness to what we need to do. And the challenge is to at once take that seriousness on, acknowledge the challenges of this 21st century, while you have a positive vision. And one of the wonderful things about Bob and his colleagues and what they do generally, and what they're doing specifically with his journal Solutions, is just that. How, in the face of so many ecological challenges, poverty that in so many parts of the world is really hard to get rid of, it seems, the struggle for human rights in so many parts of the world, in the face of those three great challenges, how do we keep a positive vision? It's not easy. And one of the ways I have found to do it is to gather like this, gather with thinkers, with students, with faculty, with people who are taking time from their day-to-day to wonder what can we do next. It's very powerful. It's very fun, actually, in the end of the day. So it's in that spirit that I'm here. In addition to thanking Bob and his colleagues and all of you here at UVM, I want to thank a couple of foundations that have helped me recently. The Luce Foundation helped me in my the previous 3 years while I was teaching and doing research at Middlebury, and now I'm benefiting from the great help and even guidance of the Betsy and Jesse Fink Foundation. So I'm very thankful for that as well. I'm going to try to talk for no more than 40 minutes. It's great to have a clock back there. I'll go rapidly. If I'm going too rapidly, stick up a hand, but do save your questions otherwise till the end. And then we have till 12:45, right? Is that that's when we end up? So I'm going to do my very best to give us time to really have a real discussion. Put up your hand if you're an undergraduate. Okay, that's good. That's what I wanted. Today is actually a very meaningful anniversary for me, because exactly 5 years ago, I was in the middle of a course whose name you can see right here, Building the Climate Movement. And it was a course that I did with another senior colleague at Middlebury, 20 students. We have, as many of you know, we have this J term, winter term, and it's 4 weeks. And I had gotten the idea about a year before January of 2005 to do a class on building the new climate movement. The climate movement was just coalescing at the time. This movement that had become Step It Up and 350, Focus the Nation, many groups that I'll talk to you about in a little bit. So 5 years ago to the day, we were really in the culminating event of that, which was a conference that had over 100 people working together to try to envision, again, develop a positive vision of what to do. The 20 students and I studied social change. We studied the social crisis. This is actually true, and I'm going to tell you undergraduates, in less than 2 weeks, actually in about a week and a half, we read all 5 of these books. Boiling Point, Ross Gelbspan, which illustrates the difficulties we have from a systems perspective. The Tipping Point, a book many of you have, if not read, sort of know the gist of it, how ideas can quickly spread. We read a book called Doing Democracy, which was edited by a woman named Mary Lou Finley, who worked for Dr. Martin Luther King upon graduating from Stanford, and with many colleagues has developed a wonderful model for social change. We read a book that was quite relevant to the time and still is, Don't Think of an Elephant, by George Lakoff, and that's about framing. How do you talk about solutions and win strategically in a situation where there's political power and great rivalries? How does the very way you talk about things, the way you frame them, help you to win? And we read a book called The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, which was very much the product of something that had happened in Vermont. As many of you know, Howard Dean, when he ran for president in 2003, really changed the way we campaign and in many ways changed the way people interact with the internet. On a shoestring budget, thanks to many young visionaries and his campaign manager, Joe Trippi, they realized that you could use the internet to organize people. They did something called meetups, where people could go to gatherings in their neighborhood, in fact, just start gatherings in their neighborhood with some slight guidance by the campaign, talk about the Dean campaign and how it would affect change. And right as this I was planning this project, that was sort of meeting its height or reaching its height, and the book here, the Revolution Will Not Be Televised, was along those lines. We read a lot, we learned a lot from that. As I mentioned, we had a conference, and you can see here on some of the details. It ended up on the front of the New York Times. It was just really exciting. And as that ended a week ago tomorrow, 5 years ago tomorrow, we just had a feeling that we had been involved in something really special. And I think what has happened in the 5 years since certainly bears that out, and we're all really just honored by that, actually. I produced a book out of that experience too, which many students had a great role in doing. It's called Ignition: What You Can Do to Spark a Movement, and What You Can Do to Fight Global Warming and Spark a Movement. It's been a while since I looked at the subtitle. And that's really a sort of a handbook for social change. Actually, I'm happy to report it was reviewed in Ecological Economics about a year ago, the journal that Bob founded. The most recent journal I think he founded before Solutions, and got a great review, and it said it was actually a real major sort of step for thinking about social change in the context of where we are today. So I was very proud of that effort. And I actually say these things because students, all you who raised your hands, to the degree that I've been part of some really successful and amazing things here in this state with colleagues, many of whom are in this room, it's because of the energy and the vision and the excitement that you all bring to bear. This book is a good example. Now, many of you are standing there and thinking, people always say that, right? You know, so this is a guy in his late 40s, he's saying that so that we keep our attention, that we think he's nice, you know, we don't start texting and all that kind of thing. I'm not just saying that, it's the truth. And I have, to the degree that I've succeeded and gotten tenure at Middlebury College, it is because of all that I've learned working side by side with young people. It sounds like a cliche, but it's very meaningful from me. So, and everything you're going to see here bears that out. What am I up to now? At Copenhagen, I started a new group online that's called What We Do. It's about groundbreaking action in the face of these great 21st century challenges. I'm not quite sure where that's going to go yet. It's still a very new effort. I've gone on the advisory board of an amazing group called Kids versus Global Warming. The URL you can see there. It's run by a 15-year-old kid who for 3 years, since he was 12, has been doing presentations about this challenge of global warming and what we can do about it. He was a highlighted leader at this conference that I just mentioned, the National Council on Science and Education, and interestingly said that essentially we need a revolution. He quoted Thomas Jefferson, the late 1700s, and he said we need a revolution in this country. Even more interestingly, he was echoed by the next speaker, Gus Speth, who now is a Vermonter, one of the great luminaries of our time in the environmental movement, founded a National Resources Defense Council, the World Resources Institute. If you Google his name, Gus Speth, S-P-E-T-H, you'll see what a luminary he is. And he too called for a revolution. And I think that's exactly the right word. Not a revolution with people carrying around lit torches and that kind of thing, but a revolution that speaks to the best of the history of this country and indeed the history of humanity, when at times the system has gotten so out of control, so unwieldy, that is really maintaining a status quo that is unjust, that we need a revolution in all senses of that word. Evolution isn't good enough. And Alec, whose work you'll be seeing more of soon, I'm quite sure, speaks to that very eloquently, as do many of the people, I hope, with whom you work and from whom you learn and with whom you learn. I wanted to comment a little bit about my recent experience in Washington, and again, this conference I was at, and Bob and many of us were there. I think actually that conference was great, the new green economy, but it showed many weaknesses of, I'm going to put this in a weird way that sounds rather odd, but you'll see what I mean, of people like us. That is, people who think about the ecology, who want to do something about it, who love the values and the landscape of a place like Vermont. The conference, in a way that I found actually deeply frustrating, really showed the weaknesses of what we are trying to do. Not of what we're trying to do, but of how we're trying to do it. First of all, I think we're way too self-congratulatory. The panel after panel at this conference, which had lots of gurus, again, if you Google it, you'll see luminaries in this area, not just Gus Speth. Panel after panel talked about sustainability and, you know, the kind of growth we need, and panel after panel was applauded as if this was great news. Well, we've been talking about this for years, and, you know, I'm ready to applaud when we actually make a big difference. Not small difference, but a really big difference. We haven't done that yet. I think we're very naive as a group, and I'm very much part of this. I'm criticizing myself about the power of persuasion. If we just talk enough about sustainability and steady state growth and all good things, people will start doing it. Gosh, if we've learned anything from our colleagues in psychology and even the behavioralists in economics now, who basically have just stolen stuff from psychology the way economists always do, we've learned that words aren't enough, right? Behavior is based on many things besides intention, and intention in turn is shaped by many things besides the words of others. So we have to do much better than just standing in front of groups and saying, here's a better way to live, now go do it, all right? And we all know that, right? We know about putting incentives into the economy, but I still think we rely way too much on what we think is are very powerful skills of persuasion. I think, and this is the most important one, and this I really felt this last week, I think we are just blind too often to the power of organizing. This issue that we face, collectively, these three challenges, alleviating poverty, improving human rights, and taking on the climate crisis, is ultimately a story about one word: power. It's a helpful word because it actually is about power and energy and where we get our energy. But you see what I'm getting at. It's about political power, where power resides. And as long as we don't bring that into the classroom, we don't put that into our journals that are called Solutions, and other journals meant to educate and affect change, we are blind to it. And I don't mean just putting it in occasionally and saying, go out and vote. So, as an example, Al Gore has his new book, Our Choice, which is great. It's all about solutions, and in a way that I'll talk about in a while, it has tons of solutions. It's so exciting, there's tons of solutions. And what does he say is the obstacle? Politics. You know, we need a groundswell. We need, you know, sort of political energy. But there's no real guide for how to do that. I don't have the answer to that by any means. That's not what I'm saying, though I'm working on that hard right now as part of my sabbatical. What I am saying is to you and to myself, don't be naive. Don't think by talking about sustainability or writing about sustainability or even feeling good yourself about sustainability that we're going to get to sustainability. We need to take on those people who control power, just the way you always do in a revolution. We need to do it with kindness. We need to do it with open arms. Actually, we need to do it in a loving manner. Think of Mandela, Dr. King. We need to love those people who have used power in a wrong way. But we need to get at them. And if you remember anything from this talk, it's what I just said. So let's think about this amazing moment in time, right? I mean, we're living in a time of miracles. Coming in here, I called Ida on my cell phone, you know, and somehow, mysteriously, some electrons went somewhere, and I was talking to Ida. And of course, she was 10 feet from me, so it turns out I didn't need a cell phone. But I mean, just think of all the miracles in your life. It's too hard to believe. And so many of those miracles, not just in technology, but in the openness and the freedoms, the openness and the freedoms with which we are lucky to live, are sort of, we can see sparks of them, of course, in the 18th century. The Enlightenment tradition, Montesquieu, Adam Smith, and Thomas Jefferson, who put so much of that into action in the founding words of our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And this image here, the steam engine, right? So we are in an age of fossil fuels. The steam engine was about actually getting to coal, and the mechanization therein led us to a global economy that is 20, 30, 40 times the size that anybody could have ever imagined, thanks to coal, natural gas, and oil. And much of that is absolutely fantastic, right? I mean, we live in a time of miracles for which we should be so thankful. Lifespans are twice as long, even 3 times as long as they were back then. People are healthier. They have access to education. Women in so many parts of the world have been liberated. So have most ethnic groups in ways that would have been unimaginable in the 17 and 1800s. Just do your own internal checklist right now. Think of the strides that we have made as a global community. It is truly miraculous, and in a large part, it's not just thanks to thinking about freedoms and who should have those freedoms and who should control governments. In a large part, in a way that, of course, now we understand is very paradoxical, it's because we harness the energy of coal and natural gas and oil. It is those things that have helped us to be free. And it's now, of course, as I'll detail in a moment, we're realizing the very real and foreboding and indeed starkly frightening downside of that dependence. This is our call right now to do something about poverty and human rights and the climate crisis, all of which are, of course, interrelated. If you're not doing something about it in your classes, in your hobbies, in your fun, in the time you just like to be, you're doing something wrong, in my opinion. Now, I don't mean that you should every waking moment think about, my God, how can I go and help another orphan in Haiti or free another woman in the Congo or reduce greenhouse gases a little more. You actually do need to have fun. You need to go and see movies and do what college kids do. That's very important. In fact, that fun fuels your ability to try to affect change. But I have become increasingly, I don't understand anymore, and I'm increasingly vocal about this lack of understanding, people who just don't want to get involved. All right? There is no excuse. And the last thing you want to do is look back when you're 30, 40, my age, and almost 50, et cetera, and say, why didn't I do anything? Right? Look back at slavery now. And we think now, if you're a Caucasian person like myself, and say, what would I have done back then? Would I have just stood around and been part of a system that enslaved what I now recognized are my brothers and sisters? I hope not. I certainly, on my deathbed, don't want to look back and say, oh, was I somebody who just sort of let these crises go on and did a little more texting on my iTouch? It's not going to happen with me, and it shouldn't happen with any of us. We just can't let that happen. This is an image, by the way, of a woman, a young girl in the days after Katrina. And this image actually haunts me because it's her looking at us. And I always think of it as somebody in 50 years looking at us and saying, what did you do about human rights and poverty and the climate crisis? Issues, of course, which are all to the fore in places like New Orleans, Appalachia, Native American reservations, the Niger Delta, the Congo, so many parts of South Asia and Latin America, right? Those three things coming together. So what I want to talk about is a little bit more about this positive vision. And then the urgency of this, I'm going to get in a little more on what I was getting at. Can we get there? Can we actually get to this thing called 350? I want to think a little bit about solutions and how actually that can be a problematic idea. Talk about some of the things we can do or why we need to focus on this new decade. And then I'm going to throw out some proposed solutions in the end. Now, the way I've set this up may be a little frustrating because you're thinking, my God, we're going to get all the solutions, right? This guy from Middlebury, he's on sabbatical. He's at 6 months to figure it all out. He's going to give us a big list of solutions. I'm going to do the very opposite. In the end, I'm going to suggest some solutions. But what I want you to do as a result of this is think a little more clearly about solutions. And the great news is that if you're going to be here next week, either because you're required to or you're kind of get psyched for this series now, this series of talks will all be about getting to 350. Next week, my dear friend and colleague Michael Wilcock, who's just an extraordinary thinker and an actor in this sphere, will be talking too about solutions and how those can actually sometimes be a problem, the very idea. So that's one of the ideas I want to have here. Now, we didn't try this, but I'm going to see if I can just go online, because I do want to show you one thing about a positive vision. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay too. It's not cooperating, so that's fine. Write this in your notes. It's called A Crisis Averted. And this is a great 4-minute video that was done by the folks with Stony Fields, the yogurt people, a group called Clean Air, Cool Planet. And it came out in 2005. And it is absolutely hysterical. It's great fun. It's only 4 minutes. In fact, if you're studying framing and how to think about things, look at how you'll see how great it is. And it does something that I'm going to describe right now. It puts us in the future looking back and saying, oh yeah, we did this. We actually figured this out. Again, the title is A Crisis Averted. It's about how we overcame the climate crisis. And it's something that I do all the time with my students. I say, when you come back for your 25th reunion or your 50th reunion, project how you think the world will be and what your role will be in getting it to that better place. So again, that's why I think what Bob has done is so smart and important, is to say, build your actions around a positive vision as opposed to out of fear. It's really, really important. So what's the urgency in all this? One of the great people in this sort of study and set of propositions about solutions in terms of the climate crisis is Sir Nicholas Stern, who used to be the lead economist at the World Bank. Some of you may have read or heard of at least the Stern Review, which came out 2 or 3 years ago at the request of the United Kingdom, the British government. And the words behind me, I actually read on the way to Copenhagen. And again, I've actually been haunted by these words ever since. I kind of, I've been studying climate change and global warming for years, though I feel like a latecomer to it. But I have been studying it for years. But somehow reading this and being a father scared me to death, right? Saying this isn't something that might happen. There's a 50% probability of an increase of 5 degrees centigrade, which is, of course, 9 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a world beyond recognition. Now, I know you've heard this kind of thing in other classes, but the last time there was that kind of gap between now and the past, but now I'm talking about 5 degrees C colder, there was a glacier about a mile high on top of Burlington. So we're talking about an equivalent change, but going up, right? So the climate model suggests that kind of, even if we get this right, honestly, Vermont, by the time you come back for your 50th reunion, will be sort of like North Carolina. I'm afraid maple sugaring will be a thing of the past. But that's actually not what we're talking about. Really, to be quite frank, that would be a good result based on what we think we know right now. This is a planet out of control. It's a planet, it's Venus, I've heard some people say. Now again, it's tricky here because it's wrong to be alarmist. What I just said is so paralyzing, right, that you want to party like it's 1999, right? Just who cares? We have to care, but we have to be realistic. We have to understand what the stakes are in order to build solutions that are at a large enough scale that are really actually bold enough. So this is a truth, in other words, that needs to be told. Nobody has done a better job at this than James Hansen, who's at Columbia and NASA. And these pictures actually capture sort of the arc of his narrative. The one to your left, my right, is him as a young man testifying over 20 years ago, Senate hearing led by then Senator Al Gore, saying global warming may well be upon us and we've got big problems. The center picture captures him now, the work he does. He headlined a workshop I led at Middlebury, Getting to 350, May 1st to May 3rd. And the one on the right is actually the one I really wanted to share with you. This was where he was in the forefront of an attempt of about 1,000 of us to get arrested in Washington, D.C. last March 2nd, so 10 or 11 months ago. And we put ourselves, our bodies in front of the coal-fired power plant, which is a stone's throw from the U.S. Capitol, and tried to get arrested. We didn't, which was a good tactic by the police. But Dr. Hansen has gone on and done other things. He was actually recently arrested at the site of a mountaintop removal zone. I think he got arrested again recently protesting in Manhattan. So he's putting himself on the line in ways that actually make many of my colleagues very uncomfortable. And I just throw that out there in terms of the kinds of commitments we all should be thinking about making in a way that we're comfortable with, of course. Here is his take on the urgency, and I'll let you read that as I talk. But this is the paper which he wrote recently, and some of you may have read this in preparation for this series, where he's basically saying at 390 parts per million, where we are right about now, not CO2 equivalent, but actually CO2, we've gone too far. And we need to get back to 350 or below. That's what this whole 350.org thing is all about. So we've simply gone too far. I was reviewing some of the material around the conference that I mentioned, this one 5 years ago, and my colleague Bill McKibben, who's just a leader of all leaders in this, wrote a 3-day account of that conference. And the first account he wrote as that conference was beginning, in turn detailed a scientific report that had just come out in those very days, five years ago. And that one said maybe 400 is the highest limit, right? So maybe we don't want to go above 400. Well, it was only several years later that Hansen and others said, actually, no, the sort of target is 350. Now, let's be clear. This is not point estimate, right, in the statistical sense. It's not an exact thing, right? Honestly, it's intentional that Hansen didn't pick 343 or 352, right? 350 is a much easier number to remember. The point is to say that we have gone too far. The 390, which is an exact measure of how much CO2 there is in the atmosphere, is more than we can handle. And the evidence now, in terms of a recent report that just came out in the last few days of methane being released from the Arctic, all the scientists who study this are running around, as they say, with their hair on fire, the fear of what they're seeing. So Hansen's sort of warning here is certainly being shared by others. So is this an attainable goal? One of my great new colleagues here at Solutions asked, as we met last month, is this real? I mean, my God, you know, the people in Copenhagen, it turns out, were negotiating in a way that would get us to 750. And a lot of people say, oh my God, it's going to be 600, 700, 800. Come on, get over it. Can we really do this? We can. You know, and to me, that question would be like saying, it'll be really hard to get the world off of the slave economy. Can we really do this? I don't think that was the right question. The question is, how do we do this? But it's not actually going to look like this, right? I got this off of the 350.org website. It's not going to go deep, and once we all recognize we got a problem, right, and start protesting and drive, you know, stop driving our SUVs, we turn around. That's not going to happen. Because as you know, CO2 creates emissions and methane and other gases that basically are a stock. They're a stock pollutant. They're going to be up there for a while. The CO2 that went up in the air today, about, I think, 60% of it, it may be 40%, more or less half, it will be up there in 100 years. So that stock of stuff that we've been putting up there, say, with accelerating means since World War II, that's going to be up there for a while. So the trajectory is actually going to look more like this, what you see on your right. And actually, though, that trajectory, basically the bottom blue line, is trying to show what can happen if we get all this right. That's Hansen's own trajectory of getting to 350. I want to focus on this, on the left. We've toyed with this idea in terms of our new Getting to 350 edition of like the top 10 slides that every person in the world should know. And my vote for number 1, right, if this was like a Letterman top 10 list, would be this one. So I'm going to try to explain it to you. What's going on here on the vertical axis is gigatons of carbon, so a measure of carbon, stuff that eventually could get up in the air and increase the forcings that lead to global warming. And then these bars, if you can't read them, are oil, gas, coal, and land use. So what's going on? I'll take oil. There is almost 400 gigatons of carbon that we know about. And there's a couple of different estimates, EIA, the energy, that group, and the IPCC. So there's some differing estimates, but they're not too far from each other. So that's the full bar, right? The purple plus the blue. The purple is what we've used to date in the Industrial Revolution up to right now, okay? So again, think about 400 gigatons of carbon associated with oil. Natural gas, it's about 200, and we've only used about a quarter of it, okay, and maybe a third if you believe the ICC. What this bar is land use, and that's essentially saying by burning forests in the Amazon and cutting down trees to make suburban homes and all, we have done the equivalent of put about 200 gigatons in the atmosphere. All right, so that's what that bar is about. This is the one that you should think about and understand and act on all of the time, because this is coal, and notice it's up to 1,200, so it's well over, it's about twice what these other hats have, and most of that coal is unused. Right? The purple is what we've used today, and we have used a lot of coal in our history. Right? Think of how coal fired the industrial expansion in the United States, the UK, what it's doing in China. We've used a lot of coal, and look how much that remains. Again, even if this estimate is correct, I don't know precisely why and how these differ. So again, if somebody says to you, what should we do about global warming? What should the solutions be built around? The answer should be stopping coal. Full stop. And I don't mean just letting us burn coal in some cleverer way, because you can't put a scrubber for CO2 up on a smokestack. There is the possibility of sequestration, and while that makes many people uncomfortable, we should be researching that, because that may be the only choice we will have. But when Dr. Hansen and others are protesting coal-fired power plants or mountaintop removal sites, they are essentially acting upon this fact, that if we don't get coal right, we will lose, as will all of our descendants. And to get coal right is actually much less about the United States than it is about China. Actually, we're both big coal users, so that's the better way of putting it. There is no doubt that a lot of the difficulties at Copenhagen that led to basically a busted up process a month ago was because China and the United States, their leaders don't want to face the reality that is this. Okay? So that is what we all need to be focusing on. So how can we do this? I'm going to paint with broad brush here. And as I throw some of these things out, again, think of the sort of solutions that we'll talk as I finish up in a bit about this decade and how they fit with the implications of that graph and some of the things that are here. And also the bullets here pick up on Hansen's work, some of his writings recently, as well as some others that I'm bringing in. We need a moratorium and phase out of coal, basically. We can't build any new coal-fired power plants in the U.S., and we need to phase out those that we have. That is an immense challenge, and it's a challenge precisely because we don't yet have, on large orders of magnitude, an alternative to coal that is as cheap as coal. We don't have it yet. And I might argue even more, a factor that makes it even more difficult, the people who benefit from coal firms, are really, really powerful. They're not exactly going to lay over and die. So this is a monumentous challenge. And if I have time, I'll talk about actually we are making progress. We need a carbon tax or its equivalent. Put up your hand if you've taken econ of some kind or another. Or actually, I'm going to do it the other way. Put up your hand if you haven't taken econ. All right, so you all get to your next econ class. That's not like a sort of silly thing from an economist. You have to study economics to understand what's going on, as well as psychology and some other disciplines. But in studying economics, you learn about getting the prices right and how, in addition to persuasion, hey, sustainability is a better way of life, getting the prices right creates incentives in modern industrial economies that can move people from doing bad things, driving large SUVs and burning a lot of CO2 as they do it, to better things, driving hybrids and eventually biking. To the degree that the former is really expensive and the latter is not, you're going to do more of the same. That's the sort of essence of what microeconomics in general and environmental economics in particular is about. So of course, you put taxes on the bad things using carbon, and that encourages people to do the good things, use solar and wind. And there's an equivalent, if I get time I'll talk about it, an approach called cap and dividend. We need, and this very much does come from the recent paper of Hansen, we need incentives for sequestration. All right? We need to stop people from doing farming in ways that put a lot more carbon in the air and actually help them with creative ways of tilling soil and so forth that store carbon. There's a new approach called biochar that is related to this that people are very excited about. We need public investments in large-scale innovation. One of the great articles I'm sure that will come out in our edition is by a professor at Harvard Business School, Rebecca Henderson, and she's part of a group that is sort of asking the question, how do we not just mobilize billions of dollars a year? There's one estimate that we need $30 billion a year over the next 10 years just from the United States to invest in the technology so that the costs come down. They come down that long-run average total cost curve for all you economists. Not just throw money at these problems, but how to do it in a way that is most effective, that increases the odds that we get the kind of technological revolutions that we got with the internet, say, and the computer 50, 60 years ago. Those two were government-led initiatives, government and private folks working hand in hand with scientists. How do we do that? That's a big question, and there's a lot of people working on it, and that's a huge, huge, and really, I think, underrated by a lot of environmentalists part of the solution. And those investments, I think, picking up on an approach of a colleague I've met in Copenhagen, need to be around mitigation, reducing emissions, adaptation, which will also be a chapter in our, an article in our new journal by a colleague, Amy Seidel. How do we think about adaptation and encourage it in ways where it's necessary? And then geoengineering. Now, I'm not talking here, I hope, about putting mirrors up in the sky, scary things like that, but alas, we do need to talk about that. Just as I say to students, you don't want to, when you come back from your 50th college anniversary, say I wasn't part of the solution, I say to my fellow environmentalists, you wouldn't want in your dying breath to say, oh my God, we actually had to research engineering. We didn't do it, and that's why we're in such bad shape. I'll come back to that, and you're going to see that's going to be a really interesting dialogue in the spirit of the very reason the Solutions Journal was found, very interesting dialogue in our Getting to 350 special edition. So this and the next section begin to sort of, I hope, clarify to you ways to think about solutions. This was a picture that I got in the Bella Center where the action was in Copenhagen in December, and I saw it and immediately, thought this was brilliant. It was a bunch of people your age, doing a little street theater. It was really fun. Solutions are the problem. Now, the point they were making, they were dressed as like coal barons, is we don't need solutions. But the point I am making, and definitely the point you'll hear Michael Woolcock make next week, is that the idea of solutions, I'm putting it in quotes, or even the solution, is a really problematic idea. Okay, there is no solution. That should be obvious. So these guys, if you can't read this, let's save the Earth with heat pumps. As much as I know, I think heat pumps are a good thing, I doubt that's the single thing we need to save the Earth. Just as I doubt that solar or wind or nuclear or any other technology is the single thing we need. There is no magic bullet. Bill McKibben says we should think about magic buckshot, right? A whole bunch of solutions. But even that image is somewhat problematic because what we should really be thinking about in terms of solutions is promoting processes that improve what we're doing, processes which are contingent on the particular time and space and scale in which we're acting. Now that was kind of a mouthful, the kind of thing economists say. But basically you should always be attuned to asking, are we helping to create something that will lead to better lives, and developing feedback systems to ask if that's true? The best way that I have found to think about this nicely, I'll come to in a moment actually, but the second point I want to make about the problem of solutions is this. Not only can the idea of solutions blind you, as I just suggested, but there are actually, in many ways, there are too many solutions. So in Copenhagen, my very first few hours, I walked into this place where there was this big globe, Copenhagen, and there's this great Norwegian NGO, and they had this amazing exhibit, 101 solutions. And if you Google them, you'll see that there's this site, 101solutions.org. They've got it all figured out. Solar, geothermal, solar thermal, biochar, it's all there. Whew, I can breathe easy. But then I just picked up another journal, Yes Magazine, said, we've got the solutions in here. And Al Gore seems to have discovered the solutions. Now I don't even know what the solutions are, right? It can't be all of them. I don't think it's one of them. So how do you make sense of the fact that actually there are too many solutions? Even The Economist is getting into the act. Their latest climate change piece, they say, yeah, we kind of know what we have to do. Here's an example from some work by two scientists at Princeton, Sokolow and Pakala. We need efficiency and conservation. That's a wedge that's going to get us there. Wind, there's another one. Nuclear, right? Solutions. We figured it out. It's not that simple. We need to ask ourselves, how do we develop a portfolio of these technologies? And critically, how do we think about developing policy levers that get us there? What can we control as voters, as citizens, as activists, as scholars to refine what we know about these policy levers that get us there? Okay? And again, you can see I'm sort of making fun of all of us. People talk about, it's the technologies, it's the policy, it's the politics. Actually, I got into all this rather untraditional stuff as an economist, and this is a true story, because I was having lunch with a colleague, a very senior and respected colleague on our campus, maybe 7 years ago, and I started to talk about climate change. He's a really smart guy, very good guy, and I said, yeah, climate change is a big problem. And he said, I know, carbon tax, that's what we need to do. And he literally said, pass the salt. Okay, well, glad we've got that figured out. And I walked away saying, well, if the carbon tax, thinking like an economist, if the carbon tax is such a good idea, why haven't we done it? Well, there are a lot of reasons for that, and they have a lot to do with power, right? So the fourth bullet here, I think, does get at the truth. It's actually all these things. Certainly we need the technologies. Of course it's about policy, things like the carbon tax. Of course it's about politics. But this is the thing to focus on. The people who say we need the political will are actually right. Because without the transformative power of a citizen-based groundswell to force our elected officials to do what they should be doing around the world, not just in the United States, which is to create policy levers that work to save the planet and reduce poverty and restore human rights, as opposed to policy levers that sort of help their friends. Without that, we're not going to succeed, right? I would essentially offer that almost as an axiom. And you can see that sort of the economists weighing in this as well. Now, I spoke a little bit out of order a moment ago. Now I'm going to get back to it. The best way I have discovered to think about solutions conveniently resides on the front of thesolutionsjournal.org or com. Both, right? So go to that website and you'll see a great article by the late Donella Meadows, who gets us to think about solutions as leverage point, right? Archimedes, give me a place to stand and I can move the earth. So you think of leverage points in the context of politics and governance. You can see the way she describes it here. And note in the article, she says you even have to be careful with this idea. But the things that I'll offer in a moment, in the spirit of, say, the carbon tax, are those things. And so what our series is going to be about, and what this journal will be about, and what certainly your policy and economics classes and sociology, in fact, all of them should be about, is how do we envision what these policy levers are and then get the right people to pull them, essentially. That's our challenge. So what I want to do with this, what we are going to do with this special edition is think about this decade. Right? We're not going to get to 350 for a long time. So what can we do in this decade? What are the realities in this decade? Well, there are very powerful interests around fossil fuels. Let's face it, right? Any way you measure, they don't want the kind of change that we all want, pure and simple. Some of them do, but most of them don't. There's a lot of resources. That's another reality of this decade. We have a lot of money we can spend, right? It didn't take long for President Bush and President Obama to sign off on almost $1 trillion to save the banks, which was about saving our economy, all told, right? But it's not a problem of resources. We've got plenty of resources. Another real reality of this decade, which is hard for the youngest folks here to understand, is that we're in a Google age. All the information you need, or maybe 90% of it, is available with a click of the mouse. That is so transformative, none of us understands it. So it's not a problem of lack of information. I had my students in a first-year seminar put together a wiki on solutions a couple of falls ago. And within a day, they had done this amazing thing. And resource citations and all that, because they could go online. Right? So we can get information and we can connect to others. Right? Some of the success of Step It Up and 350.org, these movement efforts that some of you may have been part of, was because people could connect. Something that is underrated is the fourth bullet here, and something, again, you should be thinking about all the time, which is the state of civil society. Our networks, our clubs, our organizations, our NGOs, our local organizations, the way we organize outside of the public sector and the private sector in order to affect change. Here's a quote from Paul Hawken, his wonderful book, Blessed Unrest. Paul is also on the editorial board of Solutions, and again, I'll let you read the key parts here. But this is a wonderful, beautiful book if you get a chance to read it. Could have used a little bit more editing, but all books can. It's a beautiful read, and it tells the story of this revolutionary thing that he can't even name. It's like Dumbledore, the thing that cannot be named, but it's this explosion of civil society that has the potential, in a good way, to transform our planet, and he focuses on poverty, human rights, and the environment. This is our key. This is our ace in the hole, if you will. So I'm going to end with some proposed solutions. And during the Q&A, if you want to talk about these, we can. There's a great approach that's now going to have its day in the United States Capitol, the Senate and the House, which is called cap and dividend. How many of you have heard about that by chance? That's good. That's great. Cap and dividend is the way to go. And that's going to be a solution. If we all work hard, we can get that voted on sooner rather than later. We obviously want to eliminate money to the bad things, fossil fuel and the way we currently grow food, these subsidies that you should have heard about and studied. We've got to get rid of those, and we're actually making some progress on that. As mentioned, we need large-scale investments in innovation. We don't always know what they are. We can't say, aha, I've got the solution, put money in this. We need to enable a process that gives the right feedback to scientists and entrepreneurs and public officials to get those out as quickly as possible. And again, that's a subject we'll talk about in the series as well as our journal. We need, in the area of development, more pragmatic policies, right? We're all thinking about Haiti all the time right now, the sort of the subtext for that is, of course, the fact that they were so poor that the buildings they built were so vulnerable to an earthquake like that. We have done a lousy job as a global community in development aid. We've done a few things well. We've figured out in some places how to educate girls, which may be the most important thing of all. But we've spent billions of dollars in awful ways, and in some ways putting it in the hands of course, corrupt leaders. We need much more pragmatic approaches to development. The work of Bill Easterly, that some of you may know at NYU, is a very good start there. And we need to expand freedom worldwide, right? We all need to work to help do that. Some solutions that are sort of next level down that are relevant right now. So these are things that people are talking about right now. Thanks to our Congressman Peter Welch, there will soon be something called Cash for Caulkers, which will essentially give people money to insulate their homes and tidy up windows and so forth. That's great for homeowners. It reduces their home bills, and it prevents us, among other things, from the need, say, to build a few more coal-fired power plants. The feed-in tariff is an approach that they actually started in Vermont. Stick a solar panel on your roof. If you're not using as much electricity as it generates, it goes back into the grid, and you get paid for it. You get a tariff, which is sometimes well above market rates to encourage this kind of thing. China has just announced that they're going to adopt that. Ontario has adopted that. It's a fascinating thing, and my colleagues in Solutions Journal know that I'm quite obsessed by it. Tax incentives for homeowners and small businesses to, again, move away from the bad stuff, move towards the good things. Good example is what they recently voted in at Berkeley, where people say, you say, oh, look, okay, maybe it's going to cost you $10,000 to put up a solar panel. Don't pay anything. We'll put it up for you, and then the cost of that, you know, when they calculate the net present value, we'll put into your utility bill. So you'll pay a higher rate, but because you now have a solar panel and maybe you complement it with a feed-in tariff, you're going to save money in the end, and you don't have to go out and take another loan. See, the problem with all this is people don't want to take out another loan, or their credit rating isn't good, don't have access to capital. That's a great kind of policy. And we need much better incentives for large companies here in the United States to invest, say, in building solar panels, solar factories in Ghana, right? Give them incentives to do that instead of throwing aid in ways that are very corrupt. So those are just 4 examples, I hope that you can see, of the kinds of solutions that fit into this broad framework. We have to move away from coal in a hurry, also move away from those other fossil fuels. We have to invest in big ways to sequester CO2 and other greenhouse, CO2 mainly. We may have to think about geoengineering, actually creative ways to take carbon out of the air, basically CO2 out of the air, and we need to do it as soon as possible thanks to the kind of energies that we in civil society can bring to bear. Think of Dr. Martin Luther King, Diane Nash, and other leaders of the civil rights movement. We need that tenfold around the world to affect these kinds of changes. So don't get into a situation yourselves where solutions are the problem. I hope for you, solutions will be the solution. It'll be a solution to thinking about your role to affect social change, and more generally, give you the kind of positive vision that's at the heart of so much that comes out of the Rubenstein School, which is to build a better future for everybody. Okay? So thank you so much, and I think we do have time for some questions.